They wanted me to do the work that they were doing. There was so much fighting that I did on that show with writers, producers, studio.
Do you know what really hides behind the familiar laughter of Malcolm and Eddie? The fiery duels between the lead actors and the team of writers and producers. That shocking swerve in Season 3, when a friendly sitcom suddenly turned into a noisy club story, leaving even its most loyal fans stunned. And the moments when the main cast admitted they were just too exhausted, worn down by a creative vision torn in two. Malcolm-Jamal Warner once said bluntly, "We had a lot of battles, with the writers, with the producers, and with the studio itself. So what was the moment that made them want to let go? Why did a sitcom with so much promise stop at episode 89, never reaching that golden 100? Because a battle like this doesn't erupt out of thin air. Its seeds had been planted long ago. The artistic dream versus harsh reality. Malcolm-Jamal Warner did not step into Malcolm and Eddie as some rookie. He was the heir of American television, tied to the enormous legacy of The Cosby Show. He had been the well-dressed young boy who became the model for an entire generation of viewers. But Warner didn't want to be shackled by old glory. He craved a new stage, a black sitcom that was different, smarter, deeper, not just a series of repetitive gag sketches. He wanted art. He wanted a true voice. And above all, he wanted audiences to see black characters represented in multiple layers of meaning, not just as lighthearted comic relief. Across from him, though, stood UPN, a young network born in 1995, living in brutal reality. By the late 90s, UPN was still the rookie in the ratings war. Constantly compared to and squeezed by giants like NBC, ABC, and CBS, the network saw every single show not just as cultural content, but as a weapon for survival. Either it delivered ratings or it vanished. There was no room for long-term artistic experiments. That's why UPN kept trying and failing, shifting time slots, scrambling schedules, demanding writers make the show easier to watch, less risky. The consequence of art being strangled by ratings came immediately. Malcolm and Eddie never had the chance to find its rhythm. One week, the show aired in prime time. The next, it was shoved into a dead slot to make room for some new series. For viewers, it was chaos. For Warner and his team, it was suffocation of their vision. And so the conflict exploded. On one side, artists longing to create a sitcom with a real voice. On the other, a network that only saw numbers on a ratings chart. This clash didn't stay theoretical. It unfolded in every meeting, every script slashed apart, every character arc added or erased by force. The result? A self-destructive loop. Art sacrificed in the name of ratings, but because of that sacrifice, the show lost the very reason audiences came to it in the first place. Ratings fluctuated. The network tightened its grip even further, actors and writers grew more exhausted, and the show bled its essence away. The artistic dream was crushed under the machinery of ratings. Malcolm and Eddie became a victim of the very system that had created it. Behind the scenes, the battles Warner mentioned were anything but glamorous. They were bitter compromises, cracks within the crew, and the sinking disappointment when ideals smashed into the hard wall of pragmatism. The clashes with UPN were only the surface. Inside Malcolm and Eddie itself, there were already deep divisions. The clash ignites Warner versus Griffin. In an interview with iHeartRadio, Malcolm-Jamal Warner laid it bare. Filming Malcolm and Eddie, he said, felt like every single day at work was another day of arguing with the writers, with the producers, with the directors, and even with my own co-star. That wasn't some vague complaint. It was a blunt confession. Internal conflict was the daily rhythm of the entire production. At the heart of it all was a near-total clash between the two leads. Malcolm-Jamal Warner had come out of The Cosby Show, the iconic family sitcom that redefined American television in the 1980s. Warner was steeped in a kind of comedy that was measured, layered, and built for mainstream family audiences. For him, a sitcom wasn't just about easy laughs, it needed to carry a certain artistic weight. He didn't hesitate to spell out his rift with Eddie. We came from two different schools, Bill Cosby's school and Richard Pryor's. Eddie Griffin came from an entirely different world. A stand-up comedian born on raw comedy stages, he was celebrated for his explosive, unfiltered style. Griffin often said he was deeply influenced by Richard Pryor, one of the most improvisational, gritty, and sometimes chaotic comedians in American history. That shaped his whole approach to sitcoms. He thrived on improvisation, craved instant audience reactions, and valued the heat of the moment over a tightly woven script. The problem was, these two styles weren't just out of tune. They were polar opposites. Warner leaned on structure, character arcs, and story development. Griffin often broke those very structures apart in pursuit of a burst of laughter. Warner wanted a sitcom that could stand the test of time. Griffin wanted a stage wide open for his comedic instincts. Writers' meetings became battlefields. Warner would push for more layers of psychology in the characters, maybe Eddie's antics revealing vulnerability, or Malcolm learning a hard lesson from failure. Griffin fired back audiences don't turn on the TV for philosophy. They want to laugh right now. Crew members later revealed moments when Griffin's improv went too far, stretching a 2-minute scene into a 5-minute monologue and throwing the shooting schedule into chaos. Warner stormed off set in anger. Scripts Warner had helped shape were slashed by the network, stripped of nuance, padded with gags and goofy side characters. Warner saw betrayal. Griffin saw it as what sells ads. UPN, desperate for ratings, often sided with Griffin. His noisy, high-energy comedy drew younger viewers more easily. For Warner, it felt like being pushed out of his own show, even though his name was in the title. The atmosphere on set grew heavy. One crew member recalled, on camera, they laughed and bounced off each other. Off camera, once cut, was called, they barely spoke. The danger was this: the war wasn't just creative anymore, it seeped into the very structure of the show. Early episodes had a light, relatable tone. Later seasons swung wildly. Some episodes chased Griffin's chaotic improv, others strained to return to family-friendly balance. Audiences noticed. One week the show was sharp and charming. The next it played like a filmed stand-up free-for-all. And as Warner bitterly admitted, we could never find a common voice. The Malcolm and Eddie set became a battlefield. These weren't small creative disagreements, they were a long war between two opposing philosophies. Discipline versus freedom, structure versus explosion. Every episode bore the marks of that tug of war. But if the clash between Warner and Griffin was already a powder keg, the network's decision would become the match. And the biggest explosion came in Season 3, when UPN, panicked by slipping ratings, made a decision almost no one could believe. The Season 3 retool. When Malcolm and Eddie opened a club. For the first 2 seasons, Malcolm and Eddie thrived on the relatable pull of 2 roommates struggling through everyday life, hauling odd jobs, hustling to pay bills, stumbling through love, and juggling all the very real messiness. It was the kind of storytelling both Black audiences and mainstream viewers could see themselves in. But by Season 3, everything suddenly spun 180 degrees. UPN stepped in to retool. Gone was the cramped Kansas City apartment. Gone were the everyday struggles. Suddenly, Malcolm and Eddie became owners of a bar club. The shift was so jarring that even loyal fans blurted out, "Wait, what just happened?" The reason behind this sharp turn wasn't a secret: ratings. After Season 2, viewership had slipped to around 3.5 million per episode, well below UPN's hopes. With the young network desperate to compete against giants like NBC, ABC, and Fox, executives believed the sitcom needed a new shock. Thus came the idea to transform the duo into flashy club owners, a move designed to lure more ad dollars from beer, liquor, and entertainment sponsors. But audiences weren't fooled. What they got wasn't a reborn show, it was a sitcom crudely plastic surgeried. The authenticity that had once grounded the story was replaced by artificial setups. Supporting characters who added everyday charm, like Nicolette and the neighborhood friends, were either written out or pushed aside with no explanation. The revolving door of cast changes made it impossible for viewers to stay invested. The backlash was sharp. Variety called the retool a desperate move that stripped the sitcom of its soul. Writers at Jet Magazine and The Washington Post were even harsher, labeling it a betrayal of Black audiences, since a show once praised for reflecting real African American life had now turned toward glossy, disconnected escapism. On early 2000s, internet forums fans wrote, "This isn't the Malcolm and Eddie we fell in love with," and the numbers proved it. The retool failed to stop the bleeding. Old viewers left disillusioned. New viewers saw no reason to stick around. Malcolm and Eddie spiraled into the death loop: lower ratings, heavier network interference, weaker episodes, even lower ratings. For Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the retool was nothing less than a slap in the face. Everything he had fought for gutted in one executive decision. What he'd once hoped would be a deep, meaningful sitcom, his stage to prove himself beyond The Cosby Show, had been reduced to a failed experiment in the network's hands. As for Eddie Griffin, even with his improvisational fire still sparking in the new nightclub setting, the top-down chaos left him without stable ground to perform. Put bluntly, The Season 3 retool was the mid-season death sentence. Fans no longer trusted the show. The cast grew weary, and UPN kept slicing and stitching like a surgeon operating again and again on a patient already too weak to survive. If the Season 3 retool had already shocked viewers, the cold, unforgiving ratings that followed were the knife that cut deepest. Ratings and the pressure to survive. According to Nielsen stats for the 1997-1998 TV season, the sitcom hovered around rank hash 149 with average ratings stuck between 3.0 and 3.2. To put that into perspective back then, a sitcom needed at least a 6.0 to 8.0 just to stay healthy. A 3.0 was basically a death sentence. It meant the show simply didn't have enough pull to hold mainstream audiences, especially when competing against juggernauts like Friends' NBC Frasier or Everybody Loves Raymond, all dominating prime time. But those numbers weren't the whole story. Malcolm and Eddie was also butchered by UPN's constant time slot shuffling. From Monday nights to midweek, then dumped into low viewership slots, the show never had a chance to build a loyal audience. Sitcoms need stability. Viewers have to know when to tune in week after week to form a habit. Instead, even hardcore fans struggled to keep up while new viewers never had a chance to find it. For audiences, following the show felt like chasing a bus with no schedule. Nobody knew when or even if it would show up next week. The result was a double tragedy. Old fans fell off, worn down by the chaos of scheduling. New fans had no reason to stay since the show had already lost its identity after the Season 3 retool. Placed next to UPN's other golden children, the gap looked brutal. Moshe, which premiered in 1996, held steady in prime time with ratings around 5.0, 6.0, consistently breaking into the national top 100. Its spin-off The Parkers rode that momentum, pulling 4.5, 5.0 on average. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Eddie languished at 3.0, losing the battle on its own home turf. For UPN, a young network desperate for ace cards to prove itself against Fox, NBC, or WB, the contrast was unforgivable. A retooled show stripped of its soul, combined with low ratings and chaotic scheduling, was nothing less than digging its own grave. If the Season 3 retool had shocked fans on screen, then behind the scenes, things were even messier. By the time the show hit its third season, it was already going through what felt like a silent purge. Cast shakeups and the why they left drama. Behind the scenes. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the brightest star, the one seen as the name carrying the ratings, never walked away midway. He stayed patient, writing the series all the way to the end. But Warner admitted he clashed often and fiercely with writers, producers, even the studio itself. Unlike Warner, Eddie Griffin never issued any official "I'm leaving" statement, mainly because the series itself ended after Season 4. But if you listen to Warner's recollections, the hidden reason becomes clear. Eddie was a live wire, unpredictable to the core. Warner recalled Eddie constantly showing up late, sometimes arriving on set without knowing his lines, then improvising wild bits that sent writers and directors into panic. For Warner, a man who prized discipline and scripts, it was a nightmare. He once said bluntly, Eddie was a madman. And it wasn't just a joke. Time, though, has softened things. 25 years later, Warner admitted, I had my version, Eddie had his version. Now we're cool as F*** with each other. The two stars stayed on stage together until the very end. But the rest of the cast, they weren't as lucky. From Season 1, Miriam Flynn as Kelly, the bar owner landlord, and the stern but kind adult presence, had anchored the show, keeping Malcolm and Eddie from flying too far off the rails. But after only a handful of episodes, Kelly vanished without explanation. For many fans, losing Kelly was like the house losing its foundation. The show slipped from the grounded realness that had made it stand out in the first place. Holly Brooks, played by Angel Brooks, appeared steadily across nearly 20 episodes in Season 1. Holly was a friend, one of the rare female voices that balanced the duo's chaos. Yet by Season 2, she was gone. No farewell scene, no explanation. Just an empty space. Later records dryly noted the character had been written out due to a shift in story direction. But for viewers, Holly wasn't just a character, she symbolized the threads of friendship and connection the show once captured so well. If there was one supporting character who made audiences smile with warmth, it was Tim, played by Jamie Cardrish. From 1996 to 1998, Tim was the goofy but lovable friend, a slower beat that balanced the quickfire banter between Warner and Griffin. He appeared steadily until the series wrapped. But just 2 years later, tragedy struck. Cardrish died of heart complications at only 32. The news hit fans like a shockwave. To the community, this wasn't just the loss of a side character, it was the loss of a piece of their youth. Tim's half-finished smile left a gap in Malcolm and Eddie history that would never be filled. To patch the void, producers introduced new faces. Christopher Daniel Barnes as Leonard Ricketts became a major player in seasons 3 and 4. Leonard had his quirks and lasted more than 40 episodes, but for many fans he was just a forced replacement for what had already been lost. The humor grew more gag-driven, losing the everyday depth Kelly, Holly, and Tim had once brought. There was no dramatic Hollywood-style firing scandal, but behind the curtain, upheaval was everywhere. Warner locked in constant creative battles with producers and the studio. Eddie Griffin quietly drifted from the spotlight. Supporting cast members were written out one by one. UPN wanted an easy, quick-hit sitcom to chase ratings while audiences longed for the warmth of real-life storytelling. That gap drained the soul of the show. And after all the conflicts, the falling ratings, the Malcolm and Eddie train finally reached the end of the tracks. The curtain dropped with Season 4, Episode 22-3 of Club. The final moment, a flat, disappointing ending. Episode 4, X-22-3 of Club, was where Malcolm and Eddie took its final bow. After 4 seasons of struggling through endless retools, the Club storyline, once pitched as the backbone of the show's later half, finally reached its climax. The episode lifted viewers up to the peak, a bustling, successful Club, hinting that the two friends had finally stabilized their careers and could step into a brighter future. But in a flash, disaster struck. An accident destroyed the entire Club. That twist wasn't just a plot device, it felt like a metaphor. Everything they had built collapsed, and this was the unavoidable full stop. What's striking is that the ending wasn't left dangling like so many sitcoms. It was crafted neatly enough to close the Club arc, while also conveniently fitting the abrupt cancellation before reaching the magic 100 episode mark. For many fans, the finale felt like a quiet message. We tried our best, but this is the ending we're forced to accept. After it aired, Malcolm and Eddie had no grand finale party, no big farewell campaign from CBS or UPN like Moshe or the Parkers. It slipped away quietly, just as it had always been treated, a second-tier show in the UPN lineup. The aftermath was even harsher. Because it stopped at 89 episodes, Malcolm and Eddie never reached the golden 100 needed for strong syndication. That single fact doomed the show to near disappearance. No widespread reruns, no second life on local stations, no decades of afterglow like its peers. In 2000, when Malcolm and Eddie quietly ended with 3 of Club, the audience reaction was little more than a collective sigh. Many fans felt betrayed by a rushed conclusion with no real farewell to those who had been loyal since day one. On TV Guide's online forums, comments read, "It felt like they just turned off the lights and walked away, and I was waiting for something warm, at least a goodbye. But instead, they gave us an explosion and silence." Entertainment press echoed the disappointment. Variety called it an abrupt closing of the book, as if UPN just wanted to sweep this show off the schedule as fast as possible. Entertainment Weekly wrote Malcolm and Eddie was once a promising sitcom, but its finale reduced it to a sad footnote in UPN's history. Some columnists even compared it to Moesha, another UPN series, whose finale sparked heated debates and fanfare, while Malcolm and Eddie vanished almost unnoticed. The shared feeling among fans was abandonment. Some even wrote letters to UPN asking why the show never hit 100 episodes, hoping for syndication. The only response they ever got was silence. On Yahoo groups at the time, one bitter fan wrote, "They didn't just cancel a show, they canceled a piece of our youth." Syndication dreams and the final letdown. In the world of 1990s, American sitcoms' 100 episodes wasn't just a number, it was a magic wand. Only after crossing that threshold could a series enter the syndication market, selling rerun rights to hundreds of local stations and cable networks. That was where sitcoms lived on for decades, where casts earned royalty checks every time an episode aired. It was the long-term security every TV actor dreamed of. The Malcolm and Eddie crew knew this all too well. Despite internal conflicts, despite jarring retools, they gritted their teeth and pushed forward. Many insiders later recalled that whenever tensions on set nearly tore the team apart, the same line of encouragement came up, "Hold on, we've got to make it to 100." That goal was the lifeline, the promise that all the chaos could still lead to something life-changing. But Hollywood is cold. When the cameras stopped at episode 89, the entire crew went silent. Just 11 short episodes away, barely half a season, yet the gap was a canyon. No syndication, no steady royalties, no long-term legacy. That dream collapsed in an instant. The pain stung sharper when compared with its contemporaries. Friends stretched to 236 episodes, becoming a billion-dollar machine for NBC, with each cast member still pulling in over $20 million a year from reruns. Seinfeld ended at 180 episodes, then secured a $1.7 billion syndication deal, making Jerry Seinfeld one of the richest comedians alive. Everybody Loves Raymond crossed 200 episodes, cementing legendary status and netting Ray Romano up to $50 million a year in the post-series era. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Eddie, a show once filled with ambition, stopped dead at the line. No syndication, no billion-dollar deals, no second chance on TV screens. It faded into obscurity, leaving only regret for those who had given it years of their lives. If just one more season had been granted, perhaps television history would have written a different chapter. And years after the show's end, a hidden behind-the-scenes secret finally surfaced, one that left fans stunned all over again. UPN ended Malcolm and Eddie because they were sick of Eddie Griffin. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the face of the sitcom, once shared candidly in an interview. They were tired of me fighting with the writers about their writing, and they were tired of Eddie's shenanigans. UPN had grown weary of Warner's constant battles with writers pushing to remove stereotypes about black characters. But what really made the network walk away were Eddie Griffin's antics and unpredictable behavior. While Warner focused on script quality, Griffin was infamous for his explosive personality pranks and erratic on-set behavior. What once felt fun became a burden on production. Instead of firing just one actor, the network chose to end Malcolm and Eddie entirely. It was a reminder internal factors, creative clashes, and talent management can be just as critical as ratings or revenue. The cancellation of Malcolm and Eddie wasn't just about ratings or syndication goals. It became a cautionary tale of how creative tension, clashing personalities, and commercial pressure collide. Warner fought for substance while Griffin's unchecked chaos tipped the scales, leading to the sudden death of a once-beloved sitcom, and for a while it seemed the story ended there. But 2 decades later, shockwaves hit Hollywood again. Shocking reveal and lasting aftermath. The final plot twist. On July 20th, 2025, news broke that Malcolm-Jamal Warner had died in a sudden drowning accident at Playa Cocos Beach in Costa Rica. He was 54. Despite 45 minutes of resuscitation efforts after being pulled from a rip current, Warner could not be saved. For American audiences, Warner was never just Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show. He was an icon, a member of a generation of black actors who dared to bring serious artistic ambition into 1990s sitcoms. Major outlets like Variety, The Washington Post, and The New York Times ran heartfelt tributes. Social media overflowed with grief fans, colleagues, and artists who had once worked alongside him, pouring out memories and respect. Few knew this: among the Malcolm and Eddie cast, there had been a real-life romance. Malcolm-Jamal Warner and Karen Melina White, who played Nicolette Vandross, had quietly dated for over 7.5 years. They never married, but their relationship became one of the most cherished sitcom love stories of the 1990s. When Warner passed, White was among the first to post a tribute, calling him an unforgettable part of my life. That revelation made Warner's death not just a Hollywood loss, but a deeply personal wound for someone who had shared both screen and life with him. But even as Hollywood mourned, Eddie Griffin stirred a storm. Instead of a simple condolence, he posted cryptic messages on social media suggesting Warner's death wasn't as simple as the media is telling you. There are forces covering up the truth. Within hours, backlash erupted. Fans of Warner lashed out, calling Griffin insensitive, disrespectful to his co-star. Entertainment outlets pounced, turning tribute into scandal. That grape juice headlined "Eddie Griffin turns Warner's tribute into conspiracy fans." Furious. On forums, one bitter comment summed it up 25 years later, and the backstage feud never really died, did it? The bitter truth: this controversy had nothing to do with why Malcolm and Eddie was canceled 2 decades earlier. But it exposed a reality: that the fracture between Warner and Griffin had never fully healed. Warner once admitted, "I had my version, Eddie had his version." And now, even on the day of his farewell, those two versions walked in opposite directions, leaving behind a legacy forever shadowed by cracks. Back then, they had built a sitcom full of promise. But once the studio lights dimmed, each walked their own path. More than 20 years later, the lives of the Malcolm and Eddie cast reveal both great triumphs and bittersweet notes of loss. The Malcolm and Eddie cast. Life after the sitcom spotlight. Eddie Griffin, the untamed firecracker. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner was the serious soul of the sitcom, Eddie Griffin was the wild spark. And even today, Griffin's comedic fire hasn't dimmed. He continues to tour, release stand-up specials like Undeniable and Enigma, and appear in hit films like Undercover Brother Deuce Bigalow and Scary Movie 3. With a net worth estimated at around $4 million, Griffin still lives as the free-spirited bad boy of comedy. He's been through 4 marriages and is the father of 11 children, a detail the American press has never tired of spotlighting. Offstage, he's a devoted father. On stage, he remains the unpredictable rebel, making audiences howl with laughter at his unfiltered, chaotic energy. Karen Molina White, the steadfast woman. If Griffin's path was explosive, Karen Molina White, the unforgettable Nicolette Vandross, chose resilience and consistency. She never disappeared from the screen. Instead, she worked steadily across shows like Veep Snowfall Animal Kingdom, and most notably, as the voice of Dejanay Jones in The Proud Family, and its Disney Plus reboot, Louder and Prouder. Her net worth today is estimated at around $3 million. But her greatest value lies in the respect she's earned from both colleagues and fans as a diligent artist, who may not always be loud, but is always present. Her personal life has remained private. After her deep 7.5-year relationship with Malcolm-Jamal Warner, she chose to live single. When Warner passed in 2025, she was one of the very first to post a heartfelt tribute calling him an unforgettable part of my life. Malcolm-Jamal Warner, an unfinished legacy. The serious heart of the sitcom. Malcolm-Jamal Warner closed his journey at age 54 in July 2025. He was not only Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show or Malcolm McGee from Malcolm and Eddie, but also a multi-talented artist, Grammy winner in 2015 Grammy nominee, again in 2023, a musician, a poet, and a producer of mental health podcasts for the Black community. Warner's passing left an irreplaceable void. But the legacy he built through his art, his principles, and the standards he refused to compromise remains a vital chapter in American television history. Do you still have love for Malcolm and Eddie? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the most fascinating stories.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.